Hello and welcome to the OT Schoolhouse podcast, your source for school-based occupational therapy tips, interviews, and professional development. Now, to get the conversation started, here is your host, Jayson Davies. Class is officially in session.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 46 of the OT Schoolhouse podcast. My name is Jayson Davies, and I am here to support you through everything that is going on as much as I can. We're all working through this coronavirus together, and we're going to get through this with teletherapy, with whatever we got to do, right? Before we get started, I do want to say that I hope you, your family, your friends, everyone is safe. I hope you guys are healthy, and I hope everyone is surviving all the time spent inside. I already binge watched Tiger King, of course, and watching Netflix on a pretty much nightly basis. It's my way to get out in a way, other than walking my dog to the park every afternoon. So today we have on Billy Hatridge. He is an occupational therapist in Arkansas, so kind of in a more rural area. He was actually on the podcast in episode 40 when we reviewed an article about hand strength and pencil grasp, as well as handwriting a little bit. And so he's actually coming back on to share a little more about what he does in Arkansas in a rural area, how he manages his time, how he works with his assistants, how he completes evaluations. And then at the end, we're actually going to talk about how he's planning for distance learning. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be really good. But real quick, I want to give a quick shout out to purposetherapybox.com for sponsoring today's episode. They have some really cool shirts over there, such as their popular motivator shirt with a emphasized OT within the word motivator. So check it out at purposetherapybox.com. Use promo code OT Schoolhouse, all one word, to get 10% off your t-shirt order, or use OT Schoolhouse 5 to get $5 off their subscription box, which is brand new, coming soon, and is only available until April 13th. So again, check that out at purposetherapybox.com. And a special thank you to Allie and Holly, the founders of purposetherapybox.com, for being a sponsor of today's show. All right, let's jump into it. Again, Billy Hatridge. We had such a good conversation right here, so you're not going to want to miss this. Really good stuff. So yeah, here he is, Billy Hatridge, and I will catch you on the flip side. Hey, Billy, welcome back to the OT Schoolhouse podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Jayson. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah, no problem, man. It's great to have you back. In episode 40, we had you on, and you and I discussed an article review. It was about handwriting and strength, right? Or no, is that right?
It was handwriting autism and hand strength versus, I think it was finger strength, and kind of comparing the two.
There we go. And so at that point, you gave us a little bit of a background about who you are and what you're doing. But how about you go ahead and refresh our memories about where you are and what your OT practice looks like right now?
Well, my name's Billy Hatridge. I'm the supervising occupational therapist for Progressive Therapy Kids. We are a therapy company that contracts with school districts across the state of Arkansas. I myself am located in Southwest Arkansas, and so we service the schools down in this area. Our team currently provides services, or my team personally, to 9 school districts, and then myself covers 5 of those districts as far as supervising those therapy services.
Wow. Okay. So you've got a big area to cover then, I'm assuming.
It's geographically large, but one thing, the disclaimer on some of the school districts is some of them have 5 or 6 kids for the whole district. And
Wow.
So some of these districts aren't large districts. Some are, but it's easy to have that amount of districts when, you only have a few kids at some of those. So
How much time do you spend driving just in a single day sometimes?
in a single day, my longest travel is about 4 hours of driving on some of my days. But
Wow.
typically, I'm looking at about 15 hours a week on the road.
Man, that's quite a bit of time to be listening to podcasts or thinking about other things or listening to the news
Podcast
or
is
something.
pretty much it, especially up there in the mountains of Arkansas. You don't have any phone signal. You can't make any kind of conference calls or anything. So you're just kind of alone with the podcast and your thoughts.
You just got to make sure you download them before you lose service.
There's no streaming for sure.
That's funny. Well, anyways, I'm really happy to have you back on here because one of the things that I have really, it's hit me a little bit, and I've learned the last few weeks is that in California, things are so different. And as I've started this podcast and I've started to reach out and talk to people that are outside of California, or even some people that I know that have moved out of California, they just tell me how different occupational therapy and the educational system and special education as a whole is. And so I'm excited to dive into that a little bit with you. Um, but first, we're going to get into all that. Last time you introduced yourself, you talked about how you were Handwriting Without Tears certified and certified autism specialist. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So story on that, autism is something that I've been really passionate about since I was about 13. And so within a year or two of me starting my career as an OT, I became a certified autism specialist through the International Board of Continuing Education Standards. I think I left a word out there, but and so and that's kind of an international certification, and it really focused on a lot of the ABA kind of therapies and a lot of the behavioral approaches to that. And my plan at the time was to become a specialist and just work with kids with autism in the schools. Right after I got that certification, our caseload, it just expanded, and we picked up more and more school districts, and I was kind of brought out of a specialized role into a supervising role. And so I wasn't able to utilize that as much on a daily basis as I would have liked. But in the process of doing that, we got more and more handwriting referrals, more and more kids with handwriting issues. And so we had kids who were 504. They weren't receiving any special education services, but their handwriting was just so terrible that they were not able to perform well in school. So I switched gears and went towards at the time it was Handwriting Without Tears. I hadn't made the switch to Learning Without Tears yet, but went to all the classes. I had to drive all the way out to Dallas for those, but and became certified with that, which actually proved to be a bigger benefit to me as a school-based occupational therapist, since a lot of our schools look at us as the fine motor people.
Hmm. Gotcha. Yeah. My caseload right now is probably about 85, 90% kids with autism and mod severe classrooms. And so I've been looking into some various, um, just considering autism type of training and certification type of things. And I know there's so many out there. There's colleges, universities that will have like a 1 year track that you can do and just like one or two classes a quarter. And it's just all focuses on autism. And then I saw the one that you talked about. And then I know there's also some of the teachers in my district that are autism certified. And it's like a very, very short, brief, like online program. And so there's a bunch of them out there. Um, but I just wanted to hear a little bit about how yours had went. So interesting. All right.
Yeah, and IBCCES, EES. I, I jumble it, and I'm sure there's somebody out there's got it, and they're rolling their eyes. But they have several levels of the certification that I've got, and so they have like a autism certificate that is for like OTAs or paraprofessionals, and it's a lot quicker to pick up and get. And then they even have an advanced uh, autism certified autism specialist, which is like I think 38, 42 hours of ABA training involved in that.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a huge scale as far as all the different ones. And they have some mental health certifications, some anxiety based ones. So they have a lot of really good options for people who want to be able to pick up these certifications at home or on their own time. It didn't require any kind of in-person training for any of those certifications.
All right. And right now, with everyone sitting at home, you might have the time to do that.
Yeah.
One last question before we move on. Handwriting Without Tears certification. What did that look like? How many classes was that? And what does that allow you to say or to do now that you are certified in Handwriting Without Tears?
So the Handwriting Without Tears, the way the certification worked when I got it, and I don't know if they've changed it since they switched over to the Learning Without Tears, but you had to go to all of the in-person workshops. So the pre-K readiness workshop, the handwriting workshop, and then the handwriting evaluation workshop that covers their print tool. And then after you complete those required in-person trainings, you have this packet that you do at home. And so you go through 2 example evaluations of kids' handwriting. You write reports on those. You do an in-person workshop with like a dozen people or so to kind of go over the Handwriting Without Tears curriculum. And then there's like 100-question test that you take as a part of that. You take on paper and send in. And
Wow.
so you do all of that, and then you send all that in and you wait. And they'll give you that certification, which is technically what they call a level 1 certification, which I don't personally like because they only have one level. they don't have a level 2 yet. And so sometimes, so what's level 2? Why do you only have level 1? Like, well, that's the only level they've got. But it allows you to advertise yourself as a handwriting specialist. It allows you to kind of advocate in the schools that you're not just an OT who works on handwriting. You are a on paper certified specialist. And I have found, even in the school districts I've always worked in, that changed the way they listen to intervention ideas or adaptations you want to make in the classroom quite a bit when they know that you have that certification. And then it allows you to try to do, a lot of people who have the certification do handwriting tutoring or penmanship tutoring on the side, just a cash kind of deal with parents who want to do that. So I've seen a lot of people who go full time into just penmanship tutoring in bigger cities and communities.
And being that you're certified in Handwriting Without Tears, you can advertise that you are certified in that. And so I'm assuming that helps a little bit for those
It
people
does,
that
yes. And I've actually been able to go into a lot of districts and work as kind of a liaison for Handwriting Without Tears. So they're adopting their curriculum, the school wide. They're wanting to implement Handwriting Without Tears. They don't really want to send every teacher they have to Handwriting Without Tears workshops. So I get to kind of come in and go over the curriculum with the teachers and talk about the ins and outs of it and how it works in practice.
Cool. So for anyone out there interested in Handwriting Without Tears or Learning Without Tears, I think it's lwtears.com if I remember right. So yeah, you can check that out. All right. So we're going to jump into some demographics background. You already kind of mentioned a little bit about your area, rural Arkansas, and 4 hours of driving. But how many schools specifically do you have? And you kind of started to talk about how some of them might be small, but go a little bit more into detail to what these schools look like.
So we, like I said, as our team, which is myself, we have 2 other OTs and then 5 OTAs. And we cover 9 school districts, and I think that has 17 different school buildings as far as when you count up elementary schools, preschools, high schools, etc.
Okay.
And those are scattered across 5 counties that we serve. Most of our schools, our caseload is anywhere from 5 to 10 kids. So we kind of come in, we see them for a few hours, and then we get out and go on to our next school district. We have a couple school districts that are much bigger. We have 2 that make up probably just those 2 districts alone 75% of our entire caseload.
Okay.
And those are in bigger towns, and I say bigger towns, we're talking about a population of about 6,000 people is the biggest community that we serve. And at those, we have a lot of kids, and we have a lot of kids from both ends of that therapy spectrum that we serve. Really severe children to children who are just needing some of that fine motor help. And so typically our team works is our OTAs are stationed at schools that are close to them. And so we look at the geographical need there for the school districts. And then the supervising OTs kind of cover whatever's closest to them travel wise, because a lot of these schools, they're having to pay some travel time to get therapists out there. So we try to take that into account and make that they're getting therapists who are closer to home to help offset that cost.
Absolutely. And so how does travel impact your need for organization and planning?
Quite a bit. Now, for a lot of my OTAs on the team, or for almost all of our team, it's pretty straightforward. They have a set schedule. They're at, this elementary school Monday mornings from 8 to 12, and they go to this elementary school that afternoon. And they kind of roll with that, and the kids have expected times that they go to therapy. The biggest factor is carrying our stuff with us. A few of our therapists have the benefit of being only at one school all week long. And so they have these wonderful little therapy rooms with, board games and everything else. But a lot of us are working out of our cars, and so whatever we can carry into the school with us is what we have with us to do therapy with. And so that's kind of one of the big factors there. For me, it's trying to make sure I'm hitting as many of the schools as I can in a given week, making sure that I'm sitting down with all of my OTAs for an hour a week to kind of go over the caseload, go over what's happening, what kids are getting evaluated, and then talking with the special ed teachers and making those visits to make sure that our plan of care is still on track. And typically my weeks have a pretty set format, but with we're in the middle of this COVID-19 lockdown, so I don't know what annual reviews are going to look like this year, but typically that's when everything gets hectic itself, because we'll have a meeting, in the morning over here, and then 2 counties over, 2 more meetings in the afternoon. And I've got to figure out whether I need to be at both, whether I need to send an OTA in, call in, whether all they want is a piece of paper and they're fine. So that gets kind of hectic. But typically I'm able to get to all of my districts at least once a week. And so we work kind of on a weekly basis as far as chart reviews and stuff go.
Okay. So you started to talk a little bit about your annual reviews and whatnot. Um, how do the districts down there handle that? I've heard, I'll just start by saying what we do. We have annual reviews throughout the entire year. A kid could have an annual review on the second day of school or the second to last day of school or anywhere in between. Is that similar for you, or do they tend to group them all into a similar time frame?
I'm going to be saying this a lot, so I apologize, but it varies by our schools.
Okay.
That is probably one of the most frustrating things when you cover as many school districts as we do, because we have a few schools that when we pick up a child, they do an extension IEP to where the end of that end review falls at the end of the year, or they do it all to kind of sketch out to work that way. And then we have other districts, especially our smaller ones, who, like what you say, it just happens throughout the year. So if the kid came in December, the next December is when you do your annual review. And that makes it a little more difficult for me to kind of plan. Our big district that I was talking about, the one that makes up easily half of our caseload, they do almost all of theirs in May. And so I know when those are expected. They know when to have me there. Those are the days I come in and I sit in the conference room from 8 to 3 and we just do meeting after meeting after meeting. But some of our school districts that have these interviews throughout the year, February, November, whenever it might be, we often get forgotten as far as those supplemental therapy services.
Yep.
And they'll call me up and say, hey, I forgot we had this meeting the other day. We need, a report or something to put in the file. Because when they're only having one here, one there, it gets a lot easier to forget about some of those other service providers when you're only seeing them an hour a week.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So on top of that, you kind of alluded to, last minute getting notifications for IEPs and whatnot like that. I've been there, done that. How are you able to take advantage of technology to lighten your travel needs? Or are you?
We are a little bit, especially right now, trying to figure
Mhm.
out how to best utilize teletherapy. A lot of it is just calling in to those conferences. And usually the way it'll work is if it's at a school that I'm not driving to, or the school says, hey, we really don't need you to drive 2 hours up here for this 30-minute meeting. If we can schedule it when my OTA is there, that's preferable, because then we have a person from the team who's there in person and can kind of relay that information. And then I make sure that I'm available to call in, if we need to make any changes to the plan of care. And if that's not possible, then I call in or I FaceTime in, depending on signal. And that's something else that's fun working in rural Arkansas is I have schools that I just have zero signal on my phone the entire time I'm there. And my wife loves it when I'm just unavailable for 8 hours at a time because I'm down in a valley without signal. But I mean, that's something else that we have to factor in too, is saying I can't call in because I don't have signal when I'm at this particular school. So it depends on what's happening at the conference. Obviously, if we're making a big change, then I try to really push and be there in person. But if it's run of the mill, we're meeting, we're kind of talking about general progress, we're not really changing a whole lot, then typically the schools are fine with just having one member of our therapy team with us, OT, PT, speech, and then, the paper report to go over.
Oh, okay. So you might submit a paper report, but the PT might be the one to kind of um, provide that paper report to the team or something like that? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
And that's happened quite a bit, especially for OTs covering for PTs, because our caseload tends to be a lot larger.
that
And
makes sense.
so the PT might only be at that school 1 hour a week and isn't there on Tuesdays when we're having the meeting. So they'll send the
Gotcha.
report, and then the OT team, we're the ones who kind of understand how the bot 2 reads on that manual or whatever, more so than maybe the SPED teacher. So we kind of go over that just to kind of break it down for those
Uh-huh.
who can't speak the PT language a little bit.
And
But
then
yeah,
so if the
ultimately,
parent has any, or sorry, if the parent has any concerns, then you can just text up or call up the PT real quick,
yeah.
or if need be, or something like that.
Yeah, and
Let
anytime
them.
we have any kind of meetings and we know about ahead of time, we try to make sure us supervising therapists that we're available to call at the drop of a hat.
There you go.
So if you need somebody to come in and go over something or change something part of the plan of care, that we're available via phone.
All right. All right. So I want to jump into a little bit about caseload then. You mentioned earlier that you thought you're going to have more of a heavy caseload with students with autism, but it's kind of shifted into handwriting without tears, or kids with handwriting needs, I should say. What does your current caseload look like then? You said you already talked about having several schools, but in terms of demographics and kids and different types of classrooms, what does that look like?
Well, I'll tell you what I tell all my OTA students that come through. I have what I call my rule of thirds, and that's something that's kind of been true since day one. About a third of the kids on our caseload, whether our caseload as a whole or individual schools, have some kind of prolonged lifelong disability, autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. These are the kids that are in those special ed classrooms. Those are the ones getting all of the therapy services.
Mm-hmm.
Another third of our kids typically have some kind of developmental delay. And so these are kids who might be getting a special education just for math or reading, and then getting just a little bit of OT, maybe PT. And then about a third of our kids really probably wouldn't need any kind of services if their home lives were better. And this is one that might be growing and be breaking out of that third rule
really?
that I have.
Okay.
But Arkansas right now is the number one state for meth use in the country. And
meth use?
It is methamphetamines.
Okay.
And especially in some of our rural towns and communities up in the mountains, that number might be even higher. It is projected by our Department of Health for the state that upwards of 75% of all students will have some contact with methamphetamine before they turn 18, which is a staggering number. And so one of the things that we're seeing is kids who don't really have any kind of intellectual disability or traditional disability that we might serve, but home life might be very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
We have a family that just moved in a few weeks ago. They fostered a bunch of children who are found in a meth lab, and were basically left to their own devices. And so we have kids who are 6, 7, at 6-month-old level developmentally, and really trying to figure out how to combat that and how to serve those children who kind of have a very broad range of symptoms and needs that we need to address. And so that's been the big change that we're trying to make, is in reaching those people or those clients. In school, we're taught about how to address cerebral palsy. We're taught about how to address autism for the most part, and a lot of those traditional disabilities or diagnoses we might work with. But we're having bigger and bigger and bigger caseload of children who are just coming from rough family lives and are dealing with PTSD and anxiety issues and mental health issues, and really trying to figure out how we as a team can better serve that population. I think I got off on a tangent there. I don't know if that
No, that's completely fine. I was gonna go with it and asking. I mean, you're not the first person I've heard that from. Surprising. I don't know if that's surprising at all, but have you had a chance to reach out and take any training specific to this area yet? And if so, any that jump off?
Well, we actually kind of as a team started talking about this about 3 weeks ago. We said, hey, we really need to make sure that we're addressing this properly. We need to really make some people. We're really trying to have our team, even though one OTA might be just at one district, but we're trying to make everybody a little specialized in different areas, whether it's low vision, autism, sensory, et cetera, so that we as a team can have kind of a shared knowledge. But I think 3 days after we made the decision that we needed to focus on methamphetamine use and how we're going to deal with that, the COVID-19 issue came up. And so we're kind of stopped all of that for right now, and we're switching gears towards teletherapy, and we're all scrambling to try to figure out how to do that. But at the same point, this is a good thing, because for the first time, we might have the opportunity to get into our children's homes. Even though it's digitally, this is the first time we're seeing our kids in the home environment. And so that opens up a huge opportunity for us as occupational therapists to really observe the kid in the natural home environment, which is something that you don't get to do in the school setting, and have that direct contact with families, sit there with mom and dad there at the computer and talk to them in a way that you wouldn't be able to in the public school system.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to jump into that. I just want to kind of lump it all into one thing at the end, I think,
I'll
talking about telehealth. We'll get there. Because I know many people that are out there listening, that's what they want to hear as well. And so we'll definitely get to that point. Thinking about, before everything jumped off the walls and got crazy, did you have the opportunity? You kind of talk about yourself in the supervisory role a little bit. Do you have the ability at this point to provide direct treatment, or is everything just about supervision for you?
No, there's quite a bit of direct treatment in my week. On my Tuesdays, we actually have 2 satellite clinics that offer outpatient pediatric services in our area. Okay. And so on Tuesdays, I'm at one of those satellite clinics all day. And so I get to work on birth to 21 is kind of our age range there. And it's about 50% of them are homeschool kids that would look like a typical, school-based provider, but the other
Okay.
half is usually early intervention. And so that's a full day of treatment there. And then when I make my school visits, if it's possible, I try to get in a treatment session with the kids or look back through. And if the kids missed a few times for, sickness, illness, or if the OTA had a conference and couldn't make it, I try to make those sessions up. But most of it is sitting there reviewing the charts while I observe the therapist doing, or my OTAs doing the treatment. But I would say any given week, I might get 12 to 15 hours of treatment.
Okay, that's still a good amount to satisfy your needs. Probably you're not just running around doing evaluations the entire time. You
Yeah,
actually
it
get
is.
to
It
see the
is
kids.
nice. Every once in a while, I have to cover for an OTA who's out for whatever reason, and it's nice to turn off the supervisor brain for a minute and just get back into the treatment and kind of be reminded about why I got into this in the first place.
Yeah, no joke. I mean, I think it was on the last podcast that I did with Kate and Mary, and they're talking about how the occupational therapy assistants they get the fun job. They get to work with kids all week long, and we have to we're the ones that drive around and do evaluations and go to the IEPs and have to do those parts. But
And
um,
that's the
go ahead.
conversation I have with my parents quite a bit, in the meetings, and they'll ask why I'm not the one providing therapy services, why it's, Miss Brittany or Miss Allie or whoever.
Mhm.
And I explain to them, like, you want the OTAs treating your kid because they're the best at treatment, because that's all they do. And I'm a little jealous of how creative they get with their interventions and how many wonderful crafts and activities, because I'm usually doing more research on the diagnosis and the plan of cares and figuring out, evidence-based practice, and they get to really have fun with those treatment things and look up stuff on Pinterest. And they just blow my mind, some of my OTAs, about how creative they get with that stuff.
Yeah, no joke. There's a lot of good ones out there. All right. Well, we'll continue on the OTA route. Actually, what does a caseload look like for them then?
My OTAs typically have anywhere from 20 to 30 kids on their caseload. And other than one or two, most of them are within a single district. And we've worked really hard over the last 8 years to get to that point because, like I said, when we have 9 districts and every district does it differently as far as how they do inter reviews, how they do billing, how they want to do documentation, it gets really hard to keep up with all of that. And so we really kind of prioritize having our OTAs at one single district. It just really helps make sure things are, it's easier for them to kind of understand the rules or the guidelines. Um, so typically, our services are almost always individual pull out sessions. We've been really having a push this year for push in services. Our schools have kind of mentioned that some of the kids are missing more class time than they would like. And
Mm.
so we responded with, well, we can do push in. We can absolutely come into the classroom and work with them. And then the teacher's like, well, hang on, if they need to get pulled out, they can. And so we've kind of been playing with that a little bit back and forth with the schools and figuring out, what's appropriate for each
Yeah,
kid. Not every kid needs to get push in services. Some of them really need that pull out one-on-one time. It can't be a one size fits all, um, so we're looking for a system for therapy
right.
services. And so, and as far as, so usually my OTAs, their work week is treatment. They come to work and they just pull kid after kid after kid after
Hmm.
kid. And that they kind of treat all day. My more seasoned OTAs are really good about consultation and working with classroom teachers. And there are some that have been doing this longer than I have that, absolutely are great about taking the lead and saying, hey, this teacher has some concerns about some other kids in the classroom. They have the knowledge to kind of help provide training or, any kind of accommodations for those
Yeah,
children. And
I love
then
that.
if we need more, then we get the referral for an OT evaluation and I come in and kind of work with that kid. But a lot of times it's more of a classroom as a whole. It's what we see from a lot of teachers is saying we have all these kids who can't write, all these kids who can't cut. And so our OTAs are great about stepping in and helping there.
That's great. Yeah, we actually recently episode 42 was all about RTI, and that's kind of that process of teaching the teachers using that knowledge
Yeah.
translation to let them help. Because I mean, let's be honest. There's what a school district population of OTs, if you want to call it that, or how many OTs they employ is very, very little in comparison to how many teachers and
Right.
paraprofessionals and just other professionals. And we just can't spread ourselves out that thin to work with every single student on campus, obviously. And so that knowledge translation and helping the teachers so that they can help not only the kids that they have in their classroom now, but the kids that they have in their classroom next year and the year after that. and be able to just support all those students. It really helps. So cool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What about you? Are you able to get in and do like in services for teachers, or is it more kind of on that individual teacher saying they're having concerns, and so you help that one teacher?
I'll tell you, and this is something I encourage all school-based OTs really, who have the opportunity to sit in the teacher's lounge and eat lunch. My first several months of this job, I would be sitting over there in the therapy building or closet or whatever they happen to have us, chowing down real quick and trying to get to my next one. But I found that when you go and you join in with the teachers and you sit there and you start talking, they bring up these questions that they wouldn't bring up
Hmm.
in a more formal environment. And you can really jump in there. And I've had absolutely most of my quote unquote teacher trainings happen over lunch in the teacher's lounge as they ask about, handwriting interventions and things. I've had the opportunity, a school district across the state, actually as far away on the other side of the state as possible, contacted me last summer, and I got to go up there and do a handwriting workshop for their entire co-op. And that was a really great opportunity to kind of get outside of my own school. Um, and I've tried to push it a little bit on my school district that I serve, saying that, hey, I can do this. I can do an in-service for you guys. But they kind of look at it and say, hey, well, what about, you're already here. You're already working with our teachers. They can contact you at any point during the school year. So that's kind of the way it's been working. It's
Yeah.
just the teachers know who I am. They know where I'm at. So when they have questions, they reach out to me.
Yeah. And how long have you been in the schools that you're currently with?
This will be the end of my 7th year. So this is
Okay.
my 7th school year.
So you've had some time to build some rapport, meet the teachers, and see some new teachers come in and really get them to know who you are.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know if this is the same way in California, but it's a really high turnover in special ed here in
Oh
Arkansas.
yeah.
At least
Yeah.
I've found. And so a lot of times the kids might be on their third or fourth special ed teacher and I'm still their OT. And so that really, or they're still the same OTA. And that makes us really good advocates for our students as well, because we know these kids. We've been with these. I feel old because I have a kid who's getting ready to go into high school that was like in kindergarten when I first started seeing him.
Wow.
And I'm just not ready for that. But yeah, no, it's great because we're with them. We're one of the few providers, educators, adults that these kids have consistency with over
That
the
is true.
years. And so that makes us really strong advocates when they switch schools and they go to upper elementary or middle school or high school.
All right, sorry. I just got an idea while you're talking, but I want to first of all commend you on your little tip about having lunch with the teachers, because that's a great tip, and that's one that I'm actually going to challenge myself to do, because I tend to be that OT that kind of hides in my room during lunchtime, because to be honest, part of the time is because I'm writing a report, and
Yep.
so I can kind of justify it that way. But I do see the benefits in what you're talking about, having lunch with the teachers, and so I just want to just go back to that in a second and say, yeah, I do highly suggest that too, and I'm going to try and do
Well,
better at that myself.
and I'll build off that just for a moment because it is a soapbox of mine, because a lot of our schools that we've picked up over the years, their prior service providers have been, they get in, they sign real quick in the office, they pull the kids out, and then they leave and they go on to the next school. And the principal never sees them, the superintendent never sees them, a lot of the general ed teachers never see them, and they don't know who they are, they don't know their
Hmm.
names, they know kind of their face, but that might be it. And that's a really bad way to advocate for the profession, whether you're an OT, PT, speech, anything, because
Hmm.
we really need to be taking the time, even if we're not getting paid for that time, which a lot of my OTAs are paid by the treatment hour.
Oh,
It's
okay.
still really important that you have those conversations, that you talk with the principal. Hey, how's things going? Kindergarten, is there any issues? And
Hmm.
and allow yourself to know that you're not just a treater, that you can educate the teachers, you can educate the administrators. And we can't do that when we're just getting there, treating, and leaving. And
Yeah.
so communicating clearly with the team is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do often stay at IEPs for longer than I think some service providers do, because I mean, like you're talking about, we don't get to see what's going on in the home. And a lot of times that IEP is the only communication that we get with a parent. And sometimes also with the teachers who are busy, and likewise the administrators that you're just talking about. I mean, you have that team in there, and you're really able to build rapport with everyone in those meetings. So I try to stay in IEPs as much as I can, especially if it's after school or before school. So yeah.
Gotcha.
All right. So we'll jump into supervision of CODAs just a little bit. What does that look like for you? I think you mentioned earlier trying to spend about an hour with your CODAs a week, or maybe as a month. I can't remember.
So with my OTAs, that hour a week is face to face, sitting down with them and talking about the caseload. I tend to spend an entire day with each OTA.
Okay.
And so try to find where they are, what schools they're at, and kind of follow them along throughout their day, if that's possible.
Yeah.
There's always meetings happening somewhere. There's always more
Of
kids to be
course.
evaluated. But that tends to be my model. 1 hour of sitting down and kind of going through the caseload, and then quite a bit of sitting back with the charts in hand, kind of reviewing those while they treat, and just kind of observing and answering any questions they might have during that time. And so typically we have a pretty consistent supervision. Sometimes it strays a little bit, but for the most part, I see all of my OTAs every week, and we kind of go over the caseload and go over any kids that need to be evaluated, reevaluated, etc.
Gotcha. And in Arkansas, is there a limit on how many OTAs you're allowed to supervise, or do you
According to
even?
the Arkansas State Medical Board, and they might have changed this in the last couple of years, but the answer that I got several years ago was no. That as long as you're able to keep up the requirements of the
Hmm.
supervision, but Arkansas Medicaid, I think, caps out at five, 4 or 5.
Okay.
And I'm not really sure how that works. If some schools bill Medicaid and some schools don't, what that count works. But that
Yeah.
I'm supervising 4 right now,
Okay. So
um,
either way, you're
and
under.
and I have had 5 at one time, but 2 of those were part time that are only working 10, 15 hours a week for us, and so that still kind of made one collective full time OTA. But yeah, that's 4 or 5 tends to be kind of the max as far as Arkansas goes, especially when you're dealing with Medicaid.
Gotcha. Um, so it sounded like you're kind of in the room with them. They might be treating a little bit while you're reviewing some files, and then you're able to spend some time with them, like after the school day ends or something. Spend some time going over those files with them or any type of treatment plans.
Yeah,
Does that
and
sound
that
about right?
typically happens, lunch breaks, especially
Oh, there
some
you
of
go.
our smaller districts. We've got some schools where all of our kids are at either lunch or recess at the same time
Yeah.
because
Cool.
there's only 2 or 3 classrooms per grade.
Yep.
And so that's a good time to sit down and kind of go through that,
There you go.
or just go through that while they're working with the kid, depending on, the level that kid's able to perform. So
All right. And so I want to ask you a quick question. What's your process look like about informing an OTA after you just had a meeting? So you just had an IEP for a student. What's your process for letting the OTA know what was discussed in that meeting or what they need to work on now that that meeting occurred?
if I'm going to see them face to face before their treatment sessions begin, that tends to be when I do it, when we have
Hmm.
that sit down meeting and say, okay, here's the new kid. This is kind of what the deal is. A lot of times, my OTA knows who that kid is long before I do because they've seen that kid in the classroom. The teachers have brought up concerns long before we get the referral. And so by the time we actually have that placement conference, it's more like, okay, we're good to go. The teachers already kind of expressed some concerns to you as the OTA who's coming into the
Hmm.
classroom. Um, but if not, if they have to see them before I see them in person the next time, it's a phone call usually of walk them through it. This is where they are. This is whose class they're in. These are some of the concerns, and then we'll send them the daily documentation, the evaluation and stuff, via email or
Yeah,
whatever that system is. So
great. And so what about when you're planning for meetings? Like you said, most of your kids are being seen by a CODA or an OTA. So when you're about to go to an IEP for a student, do you make it a point to see that student before going to that meeting, or do you heavily rely on the information from the OTA?
I try really hard to at least see that kid face to face, come into the classroom, say, hey, I'm Mr. Billy, I'm the OT.
Hmm.
Talk with the teacher, their general ed teacher and the special ed teacher both, just to get an idea as to, is this a sensory issue we're dealing with, fine motor issue we're dealing with, what's the biggest concerns that you have as educators for this child,
Hmm.
and then kind of relay that information onto my OTA. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes we get a kid that moves in from another district. They have OT on their IEP. They're good to go. We're having this meeting in 2 days. I'm not going to be anywhere near that district.
Yeah.
And so we go in a little blind, but my OTAs are amazing and they're really great about kind of bracing for that and being able to jump in and then give me updates when I get there.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So that kind of covers the supervision aspect, I think, unless there's any part of it that that you think I missed about supervision. Does that sound like we hit it most of the points?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. The next part I wanted to jump into, assessments. When do you assess? What do these look like? I guess let's talk about, like, you started to say the teachers will ask you for an initial assessment, right? So what does an initial assessment look like for you?
Well, typically, there's kind of two models, two ways to go about this. The first is, our more severe kids who come in, they're in the self-contained or the full-time special ed classroom.
Hmm.
They have that pronounced autism, cerebral palsy, Downs, and it's kind of you kind of know going in that this kid is a kid that's going to need OT
Yeah.
services, and that evaluation looks a lot different. If I have a kid who's kind of on the fence and they're saying, I think he might need OT, he might not, I'm not real sure. The first thing I try to do is get collection of their classwork, because that's the biggest indicator
Perfect.
of that fine motor delay.
Yeah.
And then I go through that and I talk with the teacher and see kind of what the issue is. Is it their written performance? Is it an attention issue? And then, we get that consent to a test, and then I'll pull the kid out for about an hour and I'll go through that formal evaluation process.
Okay. And then for your kids in the more mild to moderate classes, are you doing a full blown assessment for them, or is it more um, very, I guess, functional based?
It's typically a full-blown assessment for everybody. Now some of them are more profound kiddos who can't participate in a
Hmm.
formal standardized assessment. You kind of write that up depending on what level of therapy or what level of participation they can do.
Yeah.
Um, and that varies case by case, obviously. But yeah, no, all of our kids go through a formal evaluation process. I'll pull them out of the classroom. We'll sit down and we will at least attempt some of those
Hmm.
standardized testing that we do. Um, Even if I know that they might not be able to, I still try to get something on paper that I can put
Yeah.
in their report. Even if it's a scribble across the green VMI and that's all they're really giving me, that's still something that I can have to refer back to in years later. So
Absolutely. Um, do you have a few set assessments that you tend to use?
our go-to, and I know it sounds old and traditional, but we still use the Bot2 and the VMI kind of as our go-to. They're tried
Hmm.
and true, and our company and our schools both are happy with them. That being said, the sensory processing measure, the sensory profile or two that we have in our toolkit,
Hmm.
we use the REAL, which is the role evaluation of activities of life. And it
Oh,
is a life skills questionnaire that can get filled out by the teacher or by the parent. And that
okay.
goes through all of those ADLs. It goes through toileting, hygiene, money management, all those things. And so when our kids get ready for high school, we switch gears and work on life skills. And that's a really good questionnaire to give us a lot of information about what their plan of care needs to look like. And then the goal, I can't remember what the goal
I don't know what
abbreviation
it
is for,
stands for either. I know of it, but I can't remember what it
um,
stands for either.
but it's a fun one too to kind of go through. But typically, the issue I'm having with the goal right now is that by the time they hit high school, when they get referred to OT, they're usually pretty profound or pretty delayed. And the
Hmm.
goal tends to give us first percentiles on almost every kid we test,
Yeah.
because by the time they get referred to us at that age, that's what you're seeing. But those, and then we have the Peabody, we have the DAC, so
For the younger
for our
kids.
little ones. But
Yeah. Okay. And so, do you feel like being at so many schools plays a role in what your evaluations look like, or do you feel like even if you were at one school, your evaluations will look just the same?
if I was, I'm trying to think, if I wasn't a supervisor and I had just my own treatment caseload, my evaluations would probably look a little different. If I had the same 30 kids and those were the only 30 kids I
Hmm.
was seeing, I could probably have a better idea as to what specific assessments each child needed. But that being said, I'll be with them every single week, every single session. And so the evaluation isn't telling me as much as they do the way I do it right now. Because aside from what my OTA is telling me, what I'm reading in the charts, the evaluation is one of the biggest data collection moments for us as a team. So, it's one of those things. It's hard to say what it would do if things were differently, um, especially when it comes to the cost and
Yeah.
figuring out, what's efficient, and not really having opportunity to try a lot of evaluations before we buy them.
Yeah.
It's a little difficult too, but we're getting there. So
Yeah. I just think that it absolutely plays a role. I mean, you can't take out that time and the environment and what is available
mhm.
to you. It plays a role in what your evaluation will ultimately look like. And so, I thought it might be interesting to hear your point on it. So, yeah, thank you. Um, all right. I had one other question. I don't know. This is going to be a fun one. Have you ever shown up to a school to see a kid, maybe for it's an evaluation or direct treatment, and it was like the only kid that you needed to see at that school, and they weren't there?
Yeah. Yeah. All the time, we have, okay. So the farthest school from my house is 2 hours away. and that's 2 hours of driving 60 miles an hour down, state highway. And there's two kids there. And there's just two kids there. And so when we leave our school, we call up and say, hey, are they there? Before we drive all the way out there. But usually we're 30 minutes to an hour closer. I mean, I'm not driving straight from my house to this school.
Yeah, you hit another school on the way there.
But I tell you, it seems like all the time, by the time I get over there, they've checked out. So-and-so's gone home. So-and-so's sick, And so that's a little difficult to deal with, especially when you're kind of coming up on a timeline and you're only there once a week and they're sick. And then the next time you come there, speech has them. And then you're like, okay, I've only got so many windows here to get this evaluation in. And that's one of the big issues in dealing with is when the kids are out quite a bit, especially when it's flu season. I don't know how it is in California, but Arkansas, we've had school closings for the flu. We've had several districts closed for an entire week because the flu just got that bad. And we've had that issue.
Not because of coronavirus, just because of the flu.
The flu. For the last 3 years, we've had at least 2 or 3 districts every flu season have to close because the flu count just got that high.
Wow.
And so this whole COVID-19 issue, we've braced for that a little bit. We've had some school closings in the past for it. But yeah, it's just, that's been the biggest issue. It's just meeting those timelines on a kid who's not there or is unavailable quite a bit.
All right. So you guys have actually had a little bit of experience with the school closure thing then. Yeah, this is like a brand new thing for us. We're like losing our minds over here. But we'll get into that.
It's a little different though, because in the past they'd say, "Hey, we're closing for 5 days. We're going to meet back."
You know how long it's going to be,
and you know how long it's going to be, and those have been solid school closures. They didn't do AMI days; they just closed for the week. So this is new for us as well.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. I'm going to remember that phrase you used, AMI. I just want to ask you 2 questions about organization, and then we will get into some coronavirus stuff. How do you remain organized when you have so many kids, schools, and even therapy assistants to keep track of? What tips or what tools do you use?
My biggest tool for organization is my OTAs. And I know that might be like a cop-out, but when my OTAs are organized and I show up for those face-to-face meetings and they have their list of like, okay, here's the kids that need to get evaluated, here's the kids that are coming up for reevaluation, it makes my job so much easier. And when it's set up like that, I'm able to turn off my mind for all my other schools and say, okay, I'm here at Mena. I'm only thinking about Mena today. And I'm going to barrel through this list of stuff that you've got. And then when I'm at, Costatuck River or whatever my other districts are, then I can kind of focus in on that. I have, my trunk I have a company car, which helps tremendously because I'm not in and out of my personal car and unloading everything. So I have room for groceries, but, I've got a lot of files in there. I've got a lot of handouts in there. I have a tackle box that I use for my therapy materials. And so it's just a tackle box I bought from Walmart. It's got little individual compartments and boxes that you can put in there. And I've got a box for the bot. So all the little manipulatives of the bot are in one of these little tackle boxes that I just slide into my big kit. And that works really well. We use Slack as our communication platform for our team. We don't share any patient information across it. For the HIPAA reasons, but that's been the biggest thing. Hey, you've got a meeting at so-and-so, here's a couple of initials. I know who those kids are at that district. We have channels for every school district, and that keeps us really on top of things, being able to communicate via that system versus just texting each other. And then we have an ongoing record just in Slack when we make those phone calls through Slack, when we make our messages through Slack, we can keep track of when we had those conversations for the supervising requirements with the OTA logs.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that actually answers my next question, was how do you use technology to just basically for scheduling and to help your organization? But it sounds like Slack is a tool that you guys use as far as technology goes.
It is. And, speaking of technology, several years ago, I had this epiphany that I've got this almost $1,000 smartphone. I need to start using it more. And so I made the decision, like, I'm going to start using Google Calendar, and I'm going to be a power user of this phone. And I'm just going to go all in. And this doesn't make sense for me to carry this all day and not use it. And that lasted a few months, and I'm back to pen and paper. That's funny. I've got my paper notebook that I write my notes down in. It's accessible all the time. I don't have to wait till I have signal getting back up the mountain. But yeah, that's, as far as technology and scheduling and stuff, I'm still pencil paper on a lot of my stuff. A lot of my note keeping, we're still paper documentation for all of our daily notes. We still do that in paper. And our schools have mentioned trying to get us on some kind of digital platform, but I've seen our special ed teachers struggle with the computer systems for their IEPs. The paper notes there, I mean, even if there's no power in the school, you can still write your note. And
that is true. All right. Yeah, man, it's just crazy how things are so different. I mean, so different. In our schools, our IEPs, many of our schools are projecting the IEP from the computer on the wall for the parent to see as we are writing it in. We don't paper IEPs don't exist here anymore, really. I mean, until they're printed out, the final copy is given to the parent. But yeah, wow. All right.
Well, we'll have a paper copy at the meeting, and it says draft. You just got the big watermark draft on behind it. And we walk
we'll do
the parent through it, make those changes, and then everything gets compiled, typed back up, and then mailed back out to the parent within a day or two.
Okay. Yeah, that's not too far off then. All right, cool. All right. Let's dive into coronavirus a little bit. I think this is something that you and I, what's today's date? Today is March 22nd, I believe.
23rd.
23rd. I lose track because we're not in school anymore. Yeah. It's a Monday. We in California have been quarantined for 5 days now, or 1 week. And we're in our second week of quarantine. Where are your schools at right now?
So we haven't had any official like lockdown measures across the state yet. It's still kind of social distancing. You're still able to go out and do, I don't know about California, but we haven't had any kind of curfew or mandated stay-at-home measures put in place.
Yeah.
On the look at my calendar. We're on spring. This is the first day of spring break, technically. I'm losing track of my days also. Last week we were out all week, whatever date that was. Okay. Arkansas schools closed on I can't do the math. I'm trying to pull up my calendar here to look.
Like
but whatever date that was,
like
the 14th. The 14th. It was a Saturday when Asa Hutchinson, our governor, came out and said, "Hey, we need to close schools."
Okay.
And so the plan was at the time, we're going to be closed for 2 weeks. 1 week of school, spring break, come back on the 31st.
Yeah.
Asa Hutchinson made an announcement this past weekend. We're out till the 17th.
Okay.
And so a lot of our schools are going to keep up with those AMI days and kind of move forward with that. And then some point in the next 2 weeks, we'll probably have an update. But until then, that's the plan.
All right. That was a similar progression for us, except now we are out officially until May 1st.
Gotcha.
That's where we're at right now. With talks that people seem to be under the idea that it will go until the end of May even, but we're not there yet as far as officially on paper. AMI, what does AMI stand for and what does that look like?
So AMI is Alternative Method of Instruction.
Okay.
And in the past, what a lot of our schools have done, and of course nobody was ready for this, not to this scale, but what they've done is they've had, big manila envelopes that's got printed classwork for the kids to do at home. And it wasn't an e-school, it wasn't a digital learning. It was just, here's this little handy packet of homework, take it home and do it when we have a snow day or whatever, or our flu days I was talking about earlier. With this, one of the issues that the schools are trying to figure out is a lot of our kids don't have access to the internet at home, or it's not good internet at home.
Yeah.
Even me sitting here at my house, we had trouble getting the internet to work just for this call. And so the question is, if you've got kids who can't participate in learning, is it fair to your school population if only half of your kids can get online and do those e-school things? And so our schools are really trying to figure out whether it's paper instruction, whether it's online. Our company's trying to figure out the teletherapy part of it and how that will work. But that's what AMI is typically, is when they call it an AMI packet or an AMI day, it's those paper handouts and homework that kids sent home with.
So I think it was before we jumped on to this call, you talked about your company with speech therapy has done a little bit of teletherapy and you guys have a platform potentially. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're at in that whole process?
Yes. So, we had an issue for several years now of providing speech therapy to some of our schools. That's one of the most underserved disciplines that we have at some of our area. And so I think about 3 years ago, Progressive Therapy Kids has started providing speech therapy via telehealth or teletherapy. And so they usually have a paraprofessional at the school with a laptop. They bring in the kids, they sit them down, and then the kid interacts with that speech therapist over the computer. So we've been doing that for 3 years now. And so we've kind of been in the telehealth game a little bit doing that, trying to figure out how to scale everything up, trying to figure out how OT and PT is going to work over the computer. Speech might be a little easier, but that's something that we're all kind of struggling with. The telemedicine as a whole has changed a lot over the last week or two as people kind of try to loosen some of the restrictions and try to change the way it's getting paid for to help with that. And I think I'm speaking for everybody, but we're kind of just rolling with the punches right now and trying to figure out how that's going to look. Are we going to use Zoom? Are we going to use FaceTime? Are we going to use a more professional platform for this? Are we going to use telehealth? I think, which is what we were using for our therapy platform, was what we were using for the speech therapy services.
Say that again?
I think it's Thera Platform is
Okay.
the name of what we're using for speech.
Okay.
I don't know if that would work for a company-wide 17 plus therapists, but it also depends on the school district and what the school district wants to do, whether they want to go that route or not. One of the things that we're hearing here in the state of Arkansas is the possibility of closing and then resuming school in the summer. And going through the summer. And so if they close school, then the provision of therapy services via the IEP doesn't take place because the IEPs are, on hold until we come back to school. So
yes. Yeah. So in California, I'll just give you an update. What's going on right now? It's same type of conversation about teletherapy and equity as well, because we do have kids that don't have devices. And currently my wife's a fourth grade teacher in a school district. I'm an OT. So we're kind of going through the same thing. And both of our districts are trying to get computers to our kids along with hotspot devices for those who may need that. It's my understanding that both of our districts truly underestimated how many kids were going to need these devices because so many of them or the families don't have a computer. They may have an iPad, but how much can you really do on an iPad?
Right.
And most of them are relying on one smartphone for the entire family. And you obviously you just can't do work on a smartphone. Like that's not acceptable. And so they grossly underestimated, from my understanding, how many Chromebooks or whatever they're giving out they needed, as well as the device hotspots for the parents. So that's what they're working on now. We're on spring break too, just like you. And they're trying to get those devices out as fast as they can. And we're kind of in a similar spot, except we don't have, I think our district had a few speech therapists that were contracted for teletherapy. But that's a contracted. It's not like we have the platform in the district.
Right.
And so they're kind of playing around with Zoom a little bit. It's my understanding that when we come back from spring break, or maybe spring break, that we're going to have 2 weeks where it's called enrichment program versus distance learning. Enrichment is we're just going to be providing resources for parents. And so basically we're just putting some resources up on the website for the first 2 weeks and saying, hey, here's Handwriting Without Tears. They have free resources. Check it out and email us if you have questions. But after those 2 weeks, now we're getting into like the middle of April. That's when we're going to have to figure something out and start providing services through Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever it might be called. So, I think you're right. Everyone's just trying to figure it out. And so best of luck to you, best of luck to me, best of luck to everybody, I think is where we're at right now. So,
we're in a good place right now. My wife's an accountant. She usually works from home. She works for an IT network company who is booming right now.
Oh, there you go.
Everything. And so I've had a good chance of being a stay-at-home dad for the last couple of days. My 2-year-old, and she's trying to get back to work a little bit. So it's been nice for her to kind of have that opportunity to go back to work, and they're able to give her more hours while I sit here twiddling my thumbs, waiting on spring break to get back and see kind of what happens there and how my supervision role works. How our notes work, because all of our charts are still locked up at the schools, and can we go and get those? Do I need to send out all that stuff again and have our therapist work from home? It's going to be interesting for sure, figuring out how this moves forward.
Yeah, and the speech therapist I work with at my school site, or 2 of them, she's a contracted speech therapist. She's her own contractor, and she has employees. I think one other SLP and a few SLPAs. And Well, basically at this point, the district's kind of saying, well, we don't have a need for your slip buzz right now.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, are you in a similar situation where the districts may or may not be paying you at this point, or your company, because there's no school?
I haven't heard that yet. So
Okay.
far, all of our districts have been pretty on the ball about saying, yeah, whatever y'all can provide, we want to provide that to our kids.
Okay.
Now, what that's going to look like in a few weeks, what that's going to look like when we try teletherapy and it doesn't work as well as we think it does,
Hmm.
or if it does, it might
Yeah.
work great. It might work great and open up a lot of
Yeah.
opportunities. I feel like this COVID-19 situation is going to change healthcare forever.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to change the way we interact with the doctors, our therapists. It's going to change the way we interact with. So we have to teletherapy moving forward. We don't have to just serve schools that are geographically close.
Yeah.
If it's effective, um, and the question is going to be how effective is it? So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
And I think everyone, if you're not already aware of it, AOTA is working on trying to get licensure. Um, I don't know what exactly they're calling it, but they're trying to basically make licensure easier, or like a universal license. So that way, and it's basically for telehealth, because right now, if you want to
yeah,
practice telehealth in your state and Texas, you have to have a license in your state and Texas in
right.
order to see that kid in Texas, right? But they're trying to make it kind of a universal license to
Hmm.
where you just need one. So a lot of things are happening to support telehealth, and we shall see what happens, I guess. So
Yeah, and that's going to change, quite a bit on the supervision because our supervision guidelines are Arkansas State Medical Board, who has our state licensure. And so if it's a national licensure, and every state kind of has to meet the same guidelines,
uh,
what will that supervision look like for our OTAs? What will that supervision look like as far as how often you have to do it? And I don't
you know
know.
what?
It's gonna.
I forgot to ask you that question. What does that look like? Supervision
So under
guidelines.
the Arkansas State Medical Board's guidelines, you have to meet face to face for an hour for every 40 treatment hours that the OTA generates,
Wow.
which in the schools is typically like 25 hours a week,
Yeah.
realistically speaking. And so by meeting with them face to face every week, I'm more than covering that.
Yeah, and if you
And then
miss it, you can catch it up the week after.
you meet with each patient um, once every 30 days, and then you sign all of the OTA documentation within 30 days of that service.
Wow. You know how nice it is to have that very specific guidance? Because not every state has that. I mean,
Yeah.
in California, it kind of says the OT is responsible to provide guidance as necessary, or as they feel necessary based on the experience of the OTA or something like
Hmm.
that. It's very broad, it's very general, and it kind of leads a lot for interpretations, especially when you're trying to tell your district that you're overworked,
Right.
because they don't understand that, yeah, you do need to see your OTAs once a week, and you do need to be seeing the clients of the OT, or the
Hmm.
the caseload of the OTA. You need to be seeing those kids, and they
And
don't
that's one
quite
of the big
understand that.
things we've had across the state too is the interpretation of that line, meet with each client every 30 days. Some OTAs, school OTAs, or school OTs take that as I'm going to have a therapy session with each kid every single month. Others take that as I'm going to walk into the special ed classroom, look across the room, make eye contact with everybody,
Uh-huh.
check my box and move on. And that was my supervision for the month. Um, I'm trying my best to figure out, the middle line
Yeah,
there
yeah.
of observing them in the classroom, observing them at lunch, observing them with the therapist,
Mhm.
treating them myself. But yeah, that's the issue with guidelines is there's so much interpretation, whether you're talking about Medicaid or state guidelines, supervision guidelines. And I think there's a reason they make it vague so that you can kind of work it to make what works best for your system.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I wanna wrap this up. We've been going on for about an hour already. Time
Wow.
flew by.
Yeah.
Thank you, man, for coming on. I think we hit so many awesome topics. I mean, from coronavirus that we had no expectations to address this a week ago, to all the things that we did intend to address, and I think we nailed them. Um, it's gonna be super helpful for everyone. Uh, do you wanna give out any information if anyone would like to contact you, or you have a website? I don't know what you wanna share.
Yeah. So I've got a website. It's the otdad.com. It's kind of more of a blog and kind of personal insight, but there's some resources there as well. I'm the OT Dad on Facebook, Instagram. We've got a Pinterest that's not as updated as I'd like it to be. But yeah, the OT Dad, you can usually find me. I'm more than willing to help families during this time, or other educators who are kind of struggling with this. I've really tried to reach out to my parents and say, anytime you have any questions while you're home with your kids and they're not getting these services, sometimes this might be the first time a parent sees their kid's handwriting, right. And suddenly has a lot of questions.
Oh man.
And so I think it's really important for all of us. I don't know when episode's going out, but just to make ourselves available to parents who are struggling, or to other therapists, because this is new for everybody. And so if anybody has any questions or has any thoughts on school-based OT, or other OTs who are working in rural areas who have issues, I am more than happy to help any way I can.
Great, man. Well, thank you, Billy. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll stay in touch and see you next time.
Thank you, Jayson, for having me.
All right, and that wraps up episode number 46 of the OT Schoolhouse podcast. Thank you again so much to Billy Hatridge for coming on and sharing what things are like down in Arkansas. Sometimes I feel like in California, things are just so much different that it's nice to talk to people outside of California and see what OT looks like out there. This was an especially nice phone call. Billy and I kind of joked how nice it is just to have a conversation, or a real conversation with an adult sometimes outside of the house. And we're in quarantine, and so I hope this podcast can act as a way for you all to just step aside a little bit from reality and what's going on. So I appreciate you listening, and I hope you found this as a very beneficial podcast for your practice. Let us know what you thought about this podcast. Leave me a comment down in the Apple Podcast app if that's where you're listening. But yeah, otherwise, we will see you next time on the OT Schoolhouse podcast. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the OT Schoolhouse podcast. For more ways to help you and your students succeed right now, head on over to otschoolhouse.com. Until next time, class is dismissed.